welcome to this art haul, and since I immediately had to test some of those supplies, welcome to this painting process as well. If you're new here, I'm Evelyn, Swiss artist in South Korea, and I love to sketch and paint fantasy art in various mixed media. I was a seller at a stationery fair last weekend, and on my way to the event I bought this single fountain pen on a whim. I absolutely fell in love with it, sketched at the cafe we hung out on the evening before the event, and then I drew both visitors and other sellers over the next 2 days. It's such a simple tool and brings back memories of learning cursive in primary school. I realize now that I'm editing this that October is about to start and considered for a moment if I should do any kind of drawing challenge, but I'm just not big on ambitious art challenges in general, to be honest. If you have any Drawtober plans, then personally, I think if you feel inspired by a prompt list or your own personal project, then dive right in, but don't feel pressured to finish a drawing per day. Beyond this 3001 fountain pen, I also got a whole bunch of new art supplies over the last few months. So let's take a look at all of those. Welcome to this little art haul. As you can see, it is quite a paper heavy one, and there's a reason for that, which is just simply that there was a sale on the Korean art shop that I use. I usually purchase a lot of my art goods from Hwabang.net and of course from my local art shop here on Jeju Island. Whenever I go to Seoul, I can visit Homi Hwabang and some other art shops as well, but these are kind of my two staples. I splurged because all the Arch and Canson products were on sale, so I got myself the very fancy hot-pressed paper versions. I've actually used hot-pressed paper by Fabriano for years, the Fabriano Artistico, and I really liked it. I've been going through several of their biggest size blocks in the last few years, but their paper does have a bit of a texture. I'll show some close-ups of scans of my art where you can see those. It's like super annoying if you want a smooth finish, as I so often do with acrylics, and then I have to edit out that subtle texture. And a while back I used a single sheet of Arch hot pressed that I'd gotten to test out, and there's just none of that micro texture to edit out, which was such a relief when I did the scanning and editing part of a recent illustration. So the reason I got two sizes, while there is something to be said for cutting a large sheet to size, if you need specific formats it can be cheaper, it's also a lot of extra work you can mess up, and honestly a lot of my stuff is done at specific sizes. So I got the two that I use most, 9 by 12 inches, which is great for like simple interior illustrations, and then the 14 by 20 inches, which is a bit smaller than what I would really want, but this is pretty standard for me. This is one of my most used sizes. So yeah, this isn't super exciting, but it is high quality paper that I've tried in the past that I'm getting specifically to be used for commercial illustrations, for easy scanning and easy editing, and honestly because it feels wonderful to work on. Now, you might wonder why I'm buying so much watercolor paper. I'm not a watercolor artist. I like watercolors for sketches, for on the go, but I don't do finished art with it. So a lot of my work is done in acrylics, but I do like working on paper for that. It saves space, it's really easy to use. I can get the first couple layers done in kind of a washy watercolor style, which is great for also speed purposes and to kind of build up an underpainting or the first layer of an illustration. I really like that I can mount the paper on panel if I need to, or can just leave it as is. It's easy to scan, it's easy to photograph if necessary, and if it's on sale I might as well go with the highest quality option if that then saves me time later on. As I mentioned, the sale wasn't just for Arches paper. I thought I'd get this sample pack of Canson watercolor paper. Again, not a watercolor artist, but these give me an opportunity to try them out for acrylics or even gouache, maybe for some watercolor sketches or mixed media as well. This set has 12 sheets of watercolor paper, 6 different types total. So there's the Montoile, which I don't like, and I have a proper block lying around somewhere. It's just not a texture I enjoy, it's cellulose paper. But hey, the price for that, it didn't really annoy me that there are 2 sheets in here that I'll probably just use for some quick sketches. But the ones I was curious about are the Aquarelle Canson, which is a 60% cotton paper, and of course the Saunders Waterford, which I've been wanting to test for a while but didn't want to commit to a full block. And especially the Saunders Waterford has rough cold pressed and hot pressed paper in it. As you can see, I quite like hot pressed in general, so I might use these for acrylic pieces. I've been wanting to paint more small originals. I would never buy just a block, like a full-sized block of rough watercolor paper. I just don't enjoy it that much on a regular basis, but I do like to experiment, so this was a fun little set to get. I do know myself, and I know that I will get these confused at some point, so last night I wrote the name of each paper on the back of these sheets so that I also know which side is the front and which side is the back. That can be a bit confusing depending on how well I know a paper. And I might use one of these for a small original for Bad Apple Artists Collective. Starting today actually, I should maybe get started on that. This was after getting the Arches paper on sale. This was really the other reason I kind of needed to stock up some smaller postcards. Now that fall is back, I'll be at several small events here on Jeju again. There's, for example, a stationery art fair that I'm going to for the weekend. I usually have a stall where I sell my prints, but I do also sometimes host classes or events or do live drawing. So I quite like these kind of pre-cut to size postcard options. They were all quite a bit cheaper than usual, so I stocked up on one of these each. So this part of the art haul might not look super interesting, but I am so excited about this paper, you don't even know. Arches is so expensive, to be honest, but I go through paper quite slowly. Like my big Fabriano one took me nearly 2 years to use up all 15 sheets. The rest is more like smaller pieces, sketches, practice. Now, as I just said, I'm not a watercolor artist per se, but I do enjoy watercolors, so I did actually get a really nice brush. I've been curious about these. They have been showing up on Huabangnet for a little while now. It's the Tintoretto watercolor brushes. This one is the Velvet edition. I wanted something a bit heftier, something that I can use to quickly lay in colors, but that still doesn't overwhelm my often very small formats or my mixed media papers as well. So something that can hold a point, do details with. So I got the smallest size they had. I've been using the same watercolor brushes for years, so every once in a while I thought it would be nice to have like a new addition to my collection. Now, no longer speaking of watercolors, but definitely still of something that might work on these papers. After trying out the tiny sample sets that I got sent and absolutely falling in love with the limited color palettes, Holbein for the Irodori Gouache, for the artist's gouache, I caved and went out and got the Autumn version. Now, Autumn wasn't the first on my wish list. I originally had looked at the Winter palette because of how unique the colors looked, but then I got the sample for that, and while I absolutely love it, I didn't want to then buy the larger version before I'd used up the little sample colors. And it also gave me confidence that even if the colors look limited, that I will enjoy it. I will enjoy the challenge, I will enjoy the quite unique pigments that have been in these sets. And so I went and got the Autumn set, which was number 2 in my wish list for these sets. Now, just a quick disclaimer, these are so much cheaper here in South Korea than I think for a lot of you internationally. Please keep that in mind. Holbein Gouache for me is a quality choice, yes, but it's also a really accessible and affordable option. So again, like the winter palette, this may look quite restrictive, but I looked at the pigment choices for a lot of these, and there's some fun stuff in there. It's not just different typical versions of greens or anything, so I'm very curious to see how these will perform. And also the winter palette didn't have any yellow, so this was actually kind of a nice balance to that, with several yellow ochre shades and yellow shades. I'm really excited about this one because fall is coming. We're now in the later half of September, just so I have this video kind of dated. But it's still above 30 degrees each day. September hasn't felt like autumn at all, and I can't wait for these colors to become a reality outside as well. These aren't from Hwabangnet, I got them just locally. They had this single mission watercolor art set. Just a single one left over, selling them at, I don't know, like a fraction of their original price. This cost me less than 5,000 won. I wish they'd get more of them, honestly, because look at these. It's this little travel palette. Comes with multiple mixing trays, and there's room for exactly 12 colors. So I've been thinking I might just give these a home in here. I might use them later in a different palette as well, but honestly, this looks quite nice for them. And I'm also curious to see if this brush works as well with gouache paint, because it is quite sturdy. It has like a soft feel, but bristly hairs. And that concludes this art haul of everything I bought in July, August, September. This one being a little birthday gift to myself. For my test painting, I went back to the sketches I'd finished recently of portraits and flowers for the Bad Apple Artist Collective Symbology of Sleep event. I'm still new to the collective, so I really enjoy just experimenting with these smaller paintings. I can try out new paper, new paints, and even new stylistic elements. I'm painting on the canson cold-pressed paper. As I mentioned during the art haul, I'm more of a hot-pressed paper kind of gal, but that's with detailed fantasy art in mind. For originals and less detailed work, I actually like cold-pressed papers for the easier blending and subtle texture. There's a very wide range when it comes to cold-pressed paper textures. Some can have heavy indents, some are smoother, and the texture of this paper here is actually quite subtle. It's pleasant to sketch on with my pencil not catching on any texture or creating uneven lines. I also erased and redrew multiple times, not quite on purpose, but still it's a good idea to test the paper for how much erasing it can take, or else there might be bad surprises down the road. Maybe to round out this art haul just a little bit, I was at a stationery fair here on Jeju just last weekend, and I bought these cute little magnetic bookmarks, which I'm now using in all my notebooks and sketchbooks and can't wait to get even more of. This isn't a pure cotton paper, so instead of reaching for watercolors, I felt more comfortable going with gouache. gouache relies less on the paper for granulation or blending and instead lies kind of on top of it in increasingly opaque layers. Though I did start out with some transparent color washes. While the paper is taped down, I didn't properly stretch it and could see it buckle just a bit under these first color washes. It evened out quickly and perfectly, though. As I'm painting on such a small format, I quickly switched from my large new brush, which I enjoyed quite a lot, to this smaller one just because it was much easier to capture details. I really enjoyed the bristle tension and precision I could get out of it though, so I think you'll be seeing this one in my future gouache painting videos quite often. As for the color palette, I went with a modified Zorn palette, using my permanent white and ivory black gouache, but then instead of a brighter red, I wanted to test out my new autumn set. The orange Ouni shade is actually a great fit for a Zorn palette, leaning just a bit warmer and lighter than the usual cadmium red light I'd reach for. For my yellow ochre, I used the amber Kohaku shade, which really packs a punch and can easily overwhelm a mix. But Evelyn, what about the blue? That's not part of the Zorn palette, you might ask. When I said modified, I should maybe have been more specific. Adding a shade of blue was the first step I took when I was learning to paint with acrylics a few years ago. A full color palette was too overwhelming for me at the time, but I found comfort in the Zorn palette and then finally branched out with a single ultramarine blue, which really broadened the range of that limited palette while still keeping it quite harmonious. So here I'm using the Indigo Ai shade, also from the autumn set, to complete my color palette, allowing me to mix greens and cool grays without making it too complex. I still focused heavily on the Zorn nature of it all, as I really adore the toned down grayish tones it creates, as we mix ivory black with our auto paints. I wanted everything to be just a bit darker than usual so that the white poppies in the background and the red lotus flower would stand out. The lotus flower is the only area I brought in a proper red for contrast, the safflower red from the autumn set as well. Now, two of the paints I'm using are moderately lightfast. That's usually not really a concern since I use gouache in my sketchbooks, but this one is an original on loose paper. I'll head out over the weekend to grab the UV matte varnish spray by Holbein to make sure I can preserve the more fugitive pigments. It might be worth it to also use that fixative spray on some of my sketchbook pages, to be honest, just to be safe. So I'd been thinking about getting that one for a while. I'm really enjoying this paper for gouache. The paper texture looks beautiful under 1 or 2 layers of paint even, subtle but still visible, giving the illustration an overall softer look than my usually super smooth, hot-pressed paper ones. But the texture is soft enough to allow for tiny details and the paper holds up well to multiple layers and reactivating paint. My favorite part was the gold embellishment. The single tear just showed up during the drawing stage, kind of unplanned. It wasn't part of my initial sketches, but I felt like it fit here, with the lotus as a symbol of rebirth. After being asleep, I wanted the other eye to express the stage that came before the rebirth, before waking up. Maybe this sleep and rebirth, this new awakening, came after a dramatic life change, after a traumatic experience or a phase of self-reflection. We needed sleep and rest to recover, to dream again, and then comes the rebirth, a new beginning. As I usually paint with acrylics, having the gouache, which changes its color quite a bit after application. You can see sometimes how the white, for example, turns a bit darker, or darker shades lighten just a bit while they are drying, was quite unusual for me, so I did struggle a bit with that, but also enjoyed the overall very toned down result that created. The gold is a visual reference to the art of kintsugi and Japanese pottery too, of repairing something broken and making it even more beautiful and precious in that process. And the antique gold included in the autumn set has this really beautiful warm undertone that fits with the orange and amber shades and contrasts with the cooler indigo. I always enjoy embellishing original pieces. There's just something about them catching the light at the right angle and turning sparkly that feels magical. So this was a first impression of some of the shades in the autumn set that had caught my eye. I'll definitely do a full swatching and review and breakdown video at some point, but really wanted to kind of tie it all up with a single art haul here, as I've accumulated quite a few new materials over the last couple months. Let me know if you've tried any of these papers, if you have any recommendations. If you'd like to see me testing one of them with another painting process in particular, and I'll then of course try to film that as soon as possible. Overall, I think this turned out much softer and was a much quicker painting process than my acrylic pieces, and I would love to experiment more with this simpler illustration style. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.